Another great food to make is oatmeal. So, you can buy this something called a baby oatmeal, which is a powder. But instead of doing something like that, that's basically been processed, is you can make your own. The other thing I like about oatmeal is the whole family can enjoy this together. So I'm going to show you how to make a basic steel cut oatmeal and how you can potentially puree it or make it easier for your baby to eat. So I'm going to start with doing a steel cut one. Now there's different types of steel cut oats. This is a quick cook one. A lot of times I don't have as much time. This takes about 8 minutes to cook. The traditional steel cut take about 30 minutes. So if you have time on the weekend, that might be something you want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Another great thing about doing something like this is you can make a bunch ahead. So sometimes I'll make a double batch on the weekend or on the early start of the week, and then I have it for the whole week. So I'm going to go ahead and measure it out. I'm going to make a full cup. Even though that would be quite a lot of servings for a baby. So a serving size for steel cut oats for an adult is 1/4 a cup. So it's different than other oats. And you can kind of see the steel cut oats are basically chopped up oats. And so they have really barely been processed. So they take the oat and they just cut it in with steel and make it into smaller pieces. But it basically is very minimally processed. I'm gonna go ahead and add that to my pan. Next, I'm gonna add 2 cups of water. And so when I make oatmeal for myself, a lot of times I like to use milk. However, for babies, we don't recommend using cow milk because their tummies just aren't ready to digest it. So for babies, I would just make the water. Now, when I had babies, a lot of times what I would do is I'd make everybody in the family the water one, and then I would add a little bit of milk on top of mine to make it a little bit creamy. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that on. And basically, you're just gonna bring that to a boil, and then you're gonna turn it down to simmer. And it takes about 8 minutes. Now, I kind of like to add some flavor to it. So plain oatmeal is fine, but it doesn't have a lot of flavor, and most adults don't prefer to eat their oatmeal that way. So some things you can do to add flavor to baby's oatmeal are to add some spices and to add some other seasonings. And so I'm going to show you a couple different things you can add. Now you can add it at any point in the cooking process. I'm going to go ahead and add a little sprinkle of cinnamon. Now babies tend to have very sensitive taste, and so you may want to start with a small amount just because some babies do taste the spice a little bit more than you might. So I'm just going to put in a little sprinkle of cinnamon here. Some other spices that can be really nice that you can add. Cardamom has a little bit of a nice spice flavor, so you can kind of see what you and your family like, but I'm gonna add a little bit of cardamom. You could add a little bit of cloves. Cloves are really strong, so if you're gonna add cloves, I add a very small, just a couple sprinkles of it. Now my water is starting to come to a little bit of a boil, so I'm gonna kind of stir it around here. You could add these spices a little bit later in the cooking process as well, but I'm gonna go ahead and add it so it kind of cooks in. Some other things you can add are some nutmeg, and nutmeg is a really nice spice. This is actually a whole nutmeg, so you can buy pre-ground nutmeg, but you can also buy it whole and you can grate it in yourself, and it gives a little bit more of a natural flavor. So for the nutmeg, if you're gonna do it yourself, you just need to have some type of grater. This is a microplane, it makes it really easy, and I'm just gonna grate in a little bit, again, just to add a little bit of flavor to it. So add in a couple different spices. Again, you can mix and match and see what you like and your baby likes best. Some other things I like to add some extra flavor, to add some dried fruit. So I'm gonna add some currants to it, and I'm gonna cook them in because that's gonna make it easier for them to get soft, and so that your baby will be able to enjoy it a little bit easier. A whole piece of dried fruit would probably be pretty hard for a younger baby to be able to chew and swallow. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put in some currants, just probably putting in about 2 tablespoons. And again, I'm just gonna let that cook in. Now you could use other dried fruit as well. The only thing about dried fruit, you have to read the label. So some of the dried fruits, they add sugar to it. So I wouldn't recommend those. So mostly raisins and currants don't have sugar added, but things like cranberries or blueberries, often they do add sugar. So you might just wanna read your labels and make sure you know what you're getting. So now it's starting to kind of come to a little bit of a boil. And so I'm gonna go ahead and turn this down to a simmer, and then I'm gonna let it cook for about 8 minutes, and then we'll come back and check on it. Okay, a couple other ways that you can make your oatmeal so it's really tasty, and this again is for adults as well as for your babies to enjoy, is to add some apple. And so we're gonna need to make the apple soft so your baby's gonna be able to enjoy it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just chop the apple up, and I'm gonna cook it in the microwave, and it gets really nice and soft that way. So all I'm gonna do is just chop my apple. Now I like to chop my apple just like what I did, take the whole apple and go right down the middle. You tend to get most of the apple this way as opposed to cutting out quite a bit of it. So I'm just gonna cut out the seeds in the middle, and then I'm just gonna chop it up. All I wanna do is just chop it into uniform size so that when I cook it, they all cook about the same. And I'm gonna put it in a microwave safe bowl because I'm gonna microwave it. You can cook apples other ways, but I've actually found that microwaving the apples tends to actually be one of the best ways because it gets it really soft. I'm also going to add some cinnamon, and microwaving it with the cinnamon tends to get it really gooey, almost like apple pie. So it's almost like a dessert. But I really like to add this to the oatmeal because it gives a lot of good flavor. I'm going to go ahead and just chop the entire apple up here. Okay, so I chopped the entire apple. Now I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon on it. And so I'm just going to sprinkle it on. And then I'm just going to stir it in so it gets nice and uniform. And then all I'm going to do is microwave that for about a minute. Okay, so you can see I made the apples, they're nice and soft. So once our oatmeal is done, we'll kind of all put it together, and it can be a great way to add a lot of extra flavor to your oats as well as to your babies. Okay, so now we've got our oatmeal that is nice and made. That was very quick. We have a couple different ways to make it tasty. Now you could just try it just like this way. It's got some spices and it's got the currants in it. So you could spoon it in the bowl like that. But I'm going to show you a couple other ways you could make it as well. Okay, so if your baby can take texture okay, you might be able to serve it just like this, and I'll show you some examples. So you could serve it up. Again, babies in the beginning are just going to have a few bites of it, so I would just maybe start with a little portion, and then you could add the apple cinnamons on. So I'm going to go ahead and put it like that. Now that would have a fair amount of texture in it. I also recommend adding nuts to your oatmeal. It's a really healthy way for your baby to get some good protein and some good healthy fats, and also introduce them to the nuts that we've talked about that are important to have them try in the first several months after starting solids. So I'm going to add some walnuts to it. So if your baby you think can take a texture like that, you could just finely chop up the walnuts. You could just finely chop up the walnuts. And so these are somewhat chopped, but that would definitely be too big for a baby. So I'm going to finely chop it up here. Now you're not going to need that much. You're maybe going to need a teaspoon or something like that for the baby. But you want to just finely chop it up so that there's no possible risk of choking. So you could add that finely chopped up walnut to the mixture here. And there we go. That could be a nice breakfast. Now, some babies might not be able to take that much texture. So I'm going to show you how you could potentially puree the same thing and make it a little bit more easy for a younger baby to eat. So I'm just going to put some in the Cuisinart. I'm going to add a little bit more because you need a fair amount for it to be able to blend in. Now I have those apples. I'm going to add a few more apples in. And then this would be another way. You could just add in some of the nuts this way and it's going to puree it all for me. So I'm going to go ahead and just puree that so we can get into a little bit more pureed forms for younger babies. Okay, so I pureed it a little bit, and that may be enough for your baby, or you may need to add a little bit of water so that we can puree it a little bit more. Okay, so now it's a pretty nice soft puree. Again, you could add more or less water if you want to make it chunkier or if you want to make it even more pureed. This could also be a really nice time to add some breast milk. So if you are breastfeeding your baby and you have extra, you could add a little bit of breast milk to make the flavor a little bit more familiar. If you add formula, you could add the formula, although usually that's not necessary because they're okay to just have the food straight. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in our bowl, and this would be a great breakfast for your baby. And the great thing about this is that you can have the same breakfast. So you might not have yours pureed, but you can basically be eating the same breakfast, same flavors, and basically all having a family meal together. Another way to do the oatmeal, if you want to have a different flavor than the apple and cinnamon, is to do your oatmeal with some berries. So I'm just going to put a couple spoonfuls of the oats in the bowl, and then I'm going to add a couple fresh berries. Now for the berries, of course, you're going to need to chop that up so that the baby can be able to swallow it without choking. So I'm going to kind of just chop my berry up very finely. You could certainly puree this, and I'll show you what that might look like. But depending on how your baby is, if they're able to have some bigger texture, you could also include just some very finely chopped berries. So I'm just going to finely chop up my strawberries here and add a little bit of that. You can also add some berries like raspberries, and for raspberries, they easily pull apart. So I'm just gonna pull it into little pieces. They also mash in really nicely. So if you wanna mash it in, that's another great way to do it. The great thing about berries is they have a lot of really good vitamins. They have probably some of the most vitamins out of all the fruits. And so a lot of times as kids get older, when I hear parents tell me that their kids don't like vegetables, I say, well, really focus on getting a lot of the berries because they do have a lot of similar vitamins that vegetables. They're just certainly not a substitute, but if your kids are not having vegetables as much, this berries is a great way. So getting your babies early started with berries is a great way to get them used to the flavors. For the blueberries, again, you're gonna need to cut them up. And you can cut them into a few small pieces. You also could mash it up as well. So I'm just going to chop that into a few small pieces here, add it on. I'd put on a few of the chopped nuts. So like we did for the apples, I'm going to finely chop up some of the walnuts so that we can kind of add that in and get some good nutrition that way. Now you could do any kind of nut. This is walnuts, but you could also do almonds, you could do pistachios, you could do hazelnuts, you could do peanuts. So nuts in oats is a great way to get the trial of nuts. So you could see that could be another option for the oatmeal. We also could puree the berries up, or we could even just mash it with a spoon. So if your baby can take a little bit of texture, but this might be too much, you could just mash it with a fork. So I'm just gonna take that in. I'm gonna kind of mash my berries in and kind of make it all maxed together so it makes it a little bit softer and easier for your baby to. That would be another option. And then if you feel like that would still be too chunky for your baby, we could also just puree the berries up. So I'm gonna show you how we can do that. Okay, so if you want to puree it up, we're just gonna go ahead and okay, so now we have some nicely pureed berry oats. So again, great thing is that you can do this together so that if you're having oatmeal, you could have your fresh berries on it and your baby can be having the same flavors, but just having it all mixed in. So I'm gonna go ahead and just spoon that into your bowl. So there we go. So there's two different options. One is the berry one and one is the apple cinnamon one.